I paid for my parents' house for 20 years. Then my sister suddenly came back. Boxes go in the window room. She barked. My mom smirked. Don't like it. You and your husband can always move out. So we moved out. Months later, my sister called panicked. Is this some kind of joke? My name is Malene, Maddie to most, and I've been living in my parents' house for over 20 years. Not out of comfort, not because I was lazy or unmotivated, but because if I didn't, they couldn't afford the place. I started working when I was 15. My first job was at an electronics plant in suburban Georgia. I came home that day proud, holding a small paycheck and smelling like solder and machine oil. But there were no congratulations, no smiles, just my mother reaching out her hand and saying, "You eat under our roof, you pay for it." That was it, no discussion. From that month on, $900 went straight to my parents' rent. Hazel, my older sister, left for college the same year. She went off to Chicago with a full suitcase and an even fuller sense of self-importance. Her visits home were treated like royal tours. Hazel is so successful now, working in a top firm downtown. Mom would gush to every neighbor within hearing distance. And me? Maddie's hands-on. She's practical. Not everyone's built for thinking she'd sigh like I was a replacement part someone forgot to return. When I turned 18, I begged them to let me take night classes. Nothing fancy, just some bookkeeping, technical courses, anything to grow. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. "What's the point?" Dad grunted. "You'll still be stuck in that factory." Eventually, they agreed, but with a condition. Keep paying rent, plus cover tuition and books on my own. So I did. I worked all day, studied at night, lived on instant noodles, and slept 4 hours a night. Every penny I earned went toward bills, rent, and school. I never went out, never bought new clothes. All I wanted desperately was to hear just once, "We're proud of you." It never came. Not when I got promoted, not when I earned my certification, not even when I saved enough for a down payment on a condo. Instead, rent went up. Inflation, Dad said with a shrug like it was obvious. It jumped to $1,200, and I paid it without complaint. Through all that, the only person who ever made me feel seen was Caleb. We met on the factory floor. He fixed systems, trained new hires, and helped me troubleshoot tech when my equipment froze. He was calm, gentle, and genuine, a rare combination in that place. It wasn't until months later I found out he was the owner's son. He didn't want anyone to know, didn't want favors, and worked twice as hard to prove himself. We became friends, then more than friends, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to spend the rest of my life paying rent in a home where no one valued me. Caleb encouraged me to build a freelance side hustle. He helped me set up a small online business doing tech support and repairs. Every bit of extra income went toward my dream of getting out. But then Dad had a stroke. It happened on a Sunday evening. He was walking down the hall and collapsed. No insurance, no savings, no plan. The debt fell on me. Mom didn't cry. She screamed. At the hospital, at the doctors, at the world. Back home, she stood in the kitchen and looked at me. "You'll need to pick up more shifts." So I did. I canceled my lease deposit, said goodbye to the little freedom I almost had, and I stayed for him. Caleb offered to move in, offered to take me in, said we'd make it work, but I couldn't do it. I was terrified. Terrified of the guilt, terrified that Mom would say I abandoned them, terrified of being the villain in a story I didn't write. They already hated Caleb. Once they found out he worked in production, Mom dismissed him completely. That boy, he's not going anywhere, so I didn't tell them who he really was. Not that he'd one day own the entire company, not that he had a plan. Instead, I focused on Dad. I paid for contractors, installed a stair lift, safety rails, a wheelchair ramp. I handled the bills, scheduled the appointments, filled the prescriptions. Mom never said thank you, not once. All she ever muttered was, "If you'd been a son, we'd be in a real house by now." I didn't flinch. I'd long given up on their approval. Eventually, Caleb and I decided to get married quietly. No ceremony, no drama. We took photos in a park, just the two of us. We brought a cake home, thinking maybe we could still share the moment. Mom took one look and scoffed. A photo shoot? No reception? Hazel arrived just in time to roll her eyes. "What is this, a coupon wedding? Is the honeymoon happening in your backyard?" I said nothing, and so we lived. Caleb and I in that same house, still paying rent, still helping care for Dad. Caleb worked night shifts. I worked days. We passed like ships but shared the same heavy anchor. Some nights I lay awake wondering how we got here, how we let this become our life. Why didn't we leave when we had the chance? Then came the call. It was a Thursday. I just finished cleaning up dinner. My phone lit up. Hazel. She hadn't called in ages. I thought maybe something was wrong. There was no greeting, no preamble, just her voice, sharp and commanding. I'm moving in. Get the room ready. I stood there frozen. Caleb glanced up from the living room, a confused look on his face. I stared at the phone, my fingers tightening around it. She said it so casually, like it was obvious, like she belonged. And that's when I knew the storm had just begun. That Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. 2 movers stood on the porch with boxes. Hazel appeared behind them in her usual high heels, holding a caramel latte and barking orders like she ran the place. Everything goes in the room by the window, she snapped, stepping inside without even glancing at me. I stood in the hallway holding a trash bag. Caleb and I had been cleaning the kitchen, not preparing for an ambush. Hazel, are you serious right now? I asked. You told me one sentence over the phone and now you're here with movers. She shrugged. Mom said it's fine. And you don't mind, do you? I mean, come on. You're basically just renting here. That room by the window, it was Caleb's home office, the only quiet space we had. He used it for remote meetings, late-night planning, filing taxes. It had become his sanctuary in a house that never felt like home. Hazel stepped inside, scanned the shelves, and rolled her eyes. You turned this into a man cave. You can talk about your little factory jobs in the kitchen, right? I opened my mouth to object, but Hazel was already in the living room with Mom, discussing wallpaper colors and which corner would be best for her shoe rack. If you're uncomfortable, Mom said without even looking at me, you and your husband can always move out. Just like that, as if we hadn't been holding the household together for 20 years. Caleb appeared behind me and took my hand. He didn't say anything at first, just squeezed gently. Then he looked into my eyes and said, calm but firm, Maddie, enough. That evening, we stood in the living room and made the announcement. We're leaving, I said. Dad muted the TV, but didn't turn around. Mom raised her eyebrows like I just told her we were moving to Mars. Good, she said. Things will be better with Hazel around. You were never a real daughter anyway, just a tenant. Hazel didn't even look up from her phone. Oh, and don't forget to cancel your automatic rent payments. I'll manage fine without your charity. I smiled and pulled out my phone. Gladly. Within a week, we were gone. Packing didn't take long. Most of what we used, our bedding, Caleb's tools, my laptop, could fit in the back of Caleb's truck. Everything else belonged to them. The furniture, the dishes, the memories. I transferred our remaining savings into a new joint account. Caleb found us a small but bright townhouse 30 minutes away. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. No judgment, no silent resentment in the hallways, just us. For the first time, I slept in a bedroom that didn't have any photos of Hazel smiling on the walls. 3 months passed. One morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone began buzzing nonstop. Calls, voicemails, text after text, all from Hazel. What did you do? Why did I get a bill for $2,100? There's an invoice for the contractor and the house repairs. I thought you were paying all that. I took a sip of coffee, sighed, and typed one simple reply. I was, until I stopped. Turns out Hazel had no idea there was still a mortgage on the house. She thought it had been paid off years ago. In reality, I had been quietly covering the refinance payments ever since Dad's stroke, along with the property taxes, repairs, and monthly bills. The stair lift, I paid for it. The new plumbing, me. The hospital bed, also me. Everything they took for granted had been held up by me for years, and now that I was gone, the bills started pouring in. Without my income, Hazel and her husband were drowning. 2 days later, Hazel showed up on our doorstep. She wasn't alone. Her husband stood next to her, holding a grocery store pie like it was some kind of peace offering. Hazel wore a tight smile that barely covered her panic. Maddie, she started. We've been thinking. Maybe we acted too fast. Maybe we could all live together again. You, me, Caleb, maybe even Mom and Dad down the line. You know, as a family, I stared at her in disbelief. Things are just hard right now, she added quickly. We lost a few clients and the mortgage, the maintenance costs, it's a lot. I didn't say anything. Caleb stood behind me in the hallway, holding a small photo in his hand. I turned. It was the ultrasound, our child. I looked back at Hazel. You really think I'd come back? She blinked. Look, if not for us, then for Mom and Dad. They can't handle this alone. I stared at her, my voice colder than I expected. Where were you when we were handling it, when we were bathing Dad, paying his bills, fixing the roof? Where were you when I worked double shifts so they could have heating in winter? Hazel sighed. Why are you being so bitter? We're family. I laughed out loud and not kindly. No, you're not family. You're just users, parasites. Don't confuse blood with love or family with free financial support. She flinched. Her husband looked down at the pie like it was suddenly too heavy to hold. I didn't let them in. I closed the door. For a week, everything was quiet. Then one morning, I went to check the mail. Among the bills and junk flyers, there was a thick envelope, no return address. I opened it. Inside, a court summons. Hazel and her husband were suing me. They claimed that because I had voluntarily supported the household for so many years, I was now obligated to continue doing so. They even hired a lawyer to argue that I had established an informal financial contract of care. I stared at the paper. I should have felt angry, but I didn't. I felt something else. Freedom. Because now it was all out in the open, and I was done being invisible. I never thought I'd see the inside of a courtroom because of my own sister. But there I was, sitting stiffly beside Caleb, clutching a file folder full of documents like it was armor. Hazel sat across from me, polished and smug in a tailored navy blazer, her husband beside her looking bored and uncomfortable. Their lawyer, a guy who couldn't have been older than 30, had that overly confident look of someone who thought they were walking into a slam dunk. The claim that I was financially responsible for continuing to pay the mortgage and maintenance on my parents' house because I had done so voluntarily for 20 years. They said I'd established a precedent, that my actions had created a pattern of familial support that made me liable to continue. I felt like I was being sued for being too generous. Hazel dabbed her eyes with a tissue, dramatically sighing as the hearing began. Your Honor, her lawyer started pacing like he was in a TV drama. The defendant, Miss Moline, provided financial support for 2 decades. Mortgage payments, renovations, daily expenses, all of it fell on her willingly. Her sudden withdrawal of support has placed my clients under undue burden. He gestured toward Hazel, who looked up at the judge with watery eyes. We ask the court to acknowledge this sustained pattern as a binding obligation. In short, we ask the court to require Ms. Moline to resume payments or compensate for the damages caused by her abandonment. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, tilted her head. Let me get this straight. You want the court to legally force your sister to keep giving you money because she used to do it? Yes, Your Honor, the lawyer replied, based on her long-standing actions and oral agreements within the family. Then Joe stood up. My lawyer? He looked like a retired professor, gray hair, elbow-patched blazer, slow movements, but his mind razor-sharp. He approached the bench with a quiet authority. Your Honor, we submit Exhibits A through F. He handed over a neat stack. Exhibit A, a 20-year ledger of rent and utility payments made by my client to her parents, all documented with bank statements attached. Exhibit B, receipts from home improvement. Vendors, stair lifts, accessible bathrooms, plumbing repairs, all paid from her personal account. Exhibit C, a notarized letter from the general contractor confirming that Ms. Moline funded the full remodel. Exhibit D, a canceled check made out to the mortgage company signed by my client. The same mortgage they now claim she never covered. Exhibit E, Joe said, glancing at Hazel, is a little different. He pulled out his phone, tapped play, and held it near a small speaker. Hazel's voice crackled through the room. Cancel your rent payments already, Maddie. I don't need your handouts. It was a recording from our security camera the day we moved out. Hazel, clear as day, rejecting my help. The judge's eyebrows rose. Well, that's illuminating. Joe smiled. Lastly, Exhibit F, a written acknowledgement from her parents signed 6 years ago stating that Moline's payments were voluntary and not a condition of tenancy. Hazel looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Her husband leaned forward, whispering urgently to their lawyer. The judge flipped through the exhibits in silence. Finally, she looked up. I see no contractual obligation here. What I do see is a woman who supported her family out of generosity, then chose to stop. That is her right. Hazel's voice cracked. But she has money now. She has savings, a house, a baby. The judge blinked, and Hazel floundered. She just left us with everything. We're drowning. She warned you, Joe said calmly. You told her to stop paying. You moved in. You assumed she'd continue out of guilt. That's not how the law works. The judge nodded. Case dismissed. Just like that. Hazel sat frozen for a moment before grabbing her bag and storming out. Her husband trailed behind, not even looking back. Outside, I stood in the sun and felt something I hadn't in years. Not pride, not victory, just peace. They lost, and I didn't need to scream to win. A month passed, then 2. Hazel stopped calling. Through the grapevine, I heard they defaulted on the mortgage. The house was listed for sale. Mom tried to refinance but couldn't qualify. The bank took it back. They moved into a rental, downsized, quietly faded. Meanwhile, Caleb and I lived our life. He finished remodeling the nursery, soft yellow walls, a handmade mobile, and a rocking chair we found at a thrift shop. Our son Ryan was born in the spring. I cried when I held him, but not from pain, from a kind of healing I never thought I'd know. Caleb's parents came often. His mom brought soups. His dad fixed our leaky gutter. They never asked for anything in return. One afternoon, while Ryan napped and the house was finally quiet, I passed by the hallway mirror. For a second, I thought I saw my mother's shadow, the same disapproving look she always wore. I paused. "You'll never be more than a worker." She used to say, "You're not special." But as I stood there holding my son in my arms, I smiled, because now I was something she never imagined. A mother, a woman with a choice, a woman who walked away and never looked back.